Right, let me give you a Wakanda greeting.
Ah, thank you, Malorie. My name is Lindsay Fraser, and it is my great privilege to be here at the Edinburgh International Book Festival to welcome Malorie Blackman. Can I ask you please to switch your mobile phones off and make yourself comfortable, and please don't take photographs during the event. Now, Malorie will be signing copies of her books in the signing tent, which is next to this tent, so you go out of here, left and left again after the event. So please will you let us take Malorie out of the tent before you all trample her underfoot on your way to it. And that's the end of the bossy bit of my role. Now, by the time Noughts Crosses was published in 2001, Malorie Blackman was already an established novelist for young people. But because of the way Noughts Crosses took readers by storm as it did, with the eagerly anticipated sequels, Knife Edge, Checkmate, Double Cross, and now Crossfire, generating more headlines and new readers, it's perhaps easy to forget that Malorie's career had already defined her as a groundbreaking, thought-provoking, and outstanding writer for all ages as well. Picture books, young fiction, all the way up to teenage. Novels like Pig Heart Boy, Hacker, Antidote, and many, many others, and I'm sure we'll talk about them a bit today, explored areas of race and science and technology that were unusual in fiction for young people, certainly before the turn of the century, the last century, but since then too, actually, Malorie has still remained cutting edge, and her writing is all the more distinctive for that. Malorie was clearly, right from the start, a writer with ambition, and she's fearless in her exploration of subjects that projected us, her readers, well into the future. But always at the heart of her novels, with their big ideas, were characters in whom we became instantly involved. There's nothing slight or glib about Malorie's writing. It's three-dimensional, it's big-hearted, and it's demanding. You've got to pay attention to a Malorie Blackman book. So through Sephy and Calum, those flawed, passionate characters, we became immediately involved in the world she created through Noughts Crosses and their successors, and we're drawn into this parallel dystopic universe, which undoubtedly and often uncomfortably holds up a mirror to our own world and reveals many painful truths and asks questions of its readers. When, as we often do, at least I certainly do, I sit round tables with people talking about the world in which we're living and arguing about ways forward, or often ways backward, and try to find some light at the end of what feels like a rather long tunnel at the moment. My solution is always to say, read fiction. Fiction will tell you everything you need to know. And my first port of call, I think since 2001, would be Noughts and Crosses by Malorie Blackman. It so affected me, and it continues to affect me. And read the rest of the work of Malorie Blackman as well. So today, Malorie, who has a bit of a sore throat, is here to answer some questions. I will have a few to start with, but I really would like to hear much more from you than from me. Please don't be shy, because if you stick your hand up and ask a question, then somebody else will be glad you've asked it. Wait for the microphone to come with you. We'll have some fleet-footed people who will be running around with a microphone. So wait for the microphone to come to you, and then do feel free to ask Malorie any questions. We also have a bit of a treat, a bit of an exclusive at some point, but we'll decide what we're going to do there. So anyway, it's a huge privilege to welcome Malorie Blackman to the Edinburgh International Book Festival. Can you join me in giving her a warm welcome?
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you. Right.
Malorie.
Sorry, you'll have to forgive me because I sound a bit Darth Vader-ish, but I hope you can kind of make out what I'm saying.
I'm sure we will. You can all hear, can't you? Yes,
Yeah?
great,
Okay.
great. Can you just take us right back to the beginning about when you first became a writer? How did that all happen?
Wow, okay. I became a writer because of a love of reading. It's that simple. And when I was growing up, I couldn't afford books. We had non-fiction books in the house, like a set of Encyclopedia Britannicas, a sort of ubiquitous thing for migrant families. And we had books on, lots of non-fiction books, but very, very few fiction ones, because my dad's attitude whenever I said I wanted to read a fiction book was, it's not real, it's not true, you have to live in the real world, Malorie. And he just thought they were a complete and utter waste of time. And so as a consequence, I used to live down my local library, and I'd read as many books as I could, and then take out as many as I could on my ticket at the end of the day, and try and make them last for the following week. And this went on from the time I was like, well, from the time I could read until the time I was 14, and I had my first Saturday job, and then I could start buying books for myself. And it's kind of like now we've got like something like over 15,000 books in our house, so we're being crowded out by the books. And my mum says, you need to put a sign outside saying library this way, kind of thing. But I just love books. I can't imagine not having books in my life. And it was that love of the stories I read, but it was also the fact that in all the thousands and thousands of books I read that I didn't see myself in any of them. I didn't read a single book that featured a black character like me until I was in my 20s, and so it was also that spurred me on to wanting to write my own stories.
And was there somebody influential on your reading? I mean, you went to the library, was the librarian, were there people you could talk about books with?
Oh, I mean, there's sort of people passing and they'd recommend books to me, or I'd recommend books to them sort of when we were going around the library. But the librarians were incredibly important because I was a sort of regular, they got to know me and they would recommend books. And that's how I read Jane Eyre and Rebecca and read a number of the classics. Because when I was 10, 11, I'd kind of worked my way through the children's libraries in both Deptford and Lewisham libraries, which were kind of equidistant to where I used to live. And so I remember one librarian saying, try this. And it was Jane Eyre. And I went home and I started it. And I thought, what's she give me this for? It's so dry. Oh, my God. You know, when I started reading it. And then I slowly got sucked into it. And it's still one of my favourite books to this day. And I read it and I just thought, God, this is brilliant. And, you know, it was this, you know, Jane Eyre, and she's kind of been downtrodden and she has to make her own way in the world. And then it's sort of like, being a really strong character, and she's not beautiful, and she knows she's not conventionally beautiful, but she's a strong woman, and I love that. And then so I went back and I said, oh, have you got any more? And then she gave me Rebecca, and again, just blown away by that. The fact that Rebecca is dead when the story starts, but her influence on everyone that's in that book. And after that, it was kind of like the adult section. And I must admit, I read some books that were highly unsuitable for an 11-year-old. But that said, I kind of think that children are self-censoring, because you read something that you think, oh, well, you know, it's this kissy bit, you're going to skip over that and get to the next bit. And I remember, I'll never forget, a friend of mine said that her daughter, when she was 11, wanted to read Noughts Crosses, and I was going, 11's a bit young. And she said, well, that's what I said to her, so I didn't. But then I met with her a couple of years later, and she said, and her daughter Isabel, and Isabel said, actually, I read them when I was 10. And I thought, oh my God, I said, does your mum know? She said, well, she does now. But she said, and she read the lot. She read all up to Double Cross. And I said, oh, they were a bit, you know, I did write them for sort of older than you. And she said, and I said, well, what did you do when you get to sort of bits that were maybe a bit more risque? She said, oh, I just skipped over those. I'm not going to read about kissing, so I just skipped over that. And I thought, you know what, you're so smart, because it is that self-censoring thing. It's just, don't want to read that bit, so I'll skip over. Yeah. And she said, but what was interesting was, she said, but I don't think she said, I've read them again since, and I've got more out of them, because there were bits I didn't quite understand. But I do get very nervous when I hear that 10 and 11-year-olds are reading the Noughts Crosses series. But there you go.
But they are wonderful love stories, actually. I mean,
well, I
love a good love story.
We do. I must admit, I think, you know, at the basis of all my books, I think, is love in some manner, shape, or form. Whether it's the love of your family, or, you know, love of someone else, or you know, it's that thing, that driving force, which seems like a good place to play the clip we've got for you. This is actually from the Noughts Crosses TV series that's coming up, and you are the first people to see a clip. And this is the bit where Calum and Sephi in this have kind of grown up together, but then they haven't seen each other for a while. And this is him. His mum has asked him to help out at a party that Kamal Hadley is throwing, and it's been years since he's seen Callie. So this is this scene. So here we go. l'amour toujours. So there we go. So that's going to be coming. That's coming soon.
Yeah. Do we know when transmission time is?
No, we don't. But it's they haven't said yet. They haven't quite decided. But it is coming soon, and it's sort of it's a 6-part series. So.
What's it like? Have you seen the whole thing?
I've seen a rough cut of the whole thing.
Right.
Yes.
What's it like seeing your book up there?
It's bizarre because for a long while the characters were just in my head.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like when you read a book of something like The Hunger Games or Twilight or whatever, and the characters, you're running a film in your head as you're reading the book. So sometimes when you see the TV thing or see a film, it never quite lives up to the kind of film that you played with your imagination. But with this, I absolutely love it. I mean, for me, sort of Jack Rowan, the actor, is Calum, and Masali Baduza is Sefi, and I think I've been really lucky with the sort of actors who've played this, because the RSC did Noughts Crosses in 2008, and then Pilot Theatre did it this year. And all the actors who've kind of played Kathy and Selim, Calum and Sefi, I think have been absolutely amazing. So I feel like we've been really lucky.
And tell us about Stormzy.
He's in one of the episodes. He's been so amazing. He's been so supportive because I met him. I was asked to present him with a prize. He won a music prize at the South Bank Awards show, and I thought, he's a music star. I mean, for goodness sake, why would you want me to do this? And they said, well, he really loved your book. So I thought, well, okay, it's my chance to meet Stormzy. So I did it, and I sort of, did a little speech, and he came on, and it was so lovely because he came on and he said, oh my God, I said, that's Malorie Blackman over there, that's Malorie Blackman. I'm going, that's Stormzy over there, that's Stormzy. So it was lovely, but he then said, is there any way that I could kind of get just a tiny little part in it and whatever? And I said, well, you need to speak to the production company. And then he's in one of the episodes playing an editor, and he's amazing. So so it's wonderful that he's in there, and he's kind of come out and said that they're his favourite books, his favourite book series. So I just think, wow. And it's funny because a few years ago, Tiny Temper, another musician, name-checked me in a song.
Yeah.
And one of the exec music producer on the Noughts Crosses series is Rock Nation, which is a production company that's owned by Jay-Z. So my daughter said to me, she said, you are so uncool, and you have all these cool people who got a lot of people. And she's absolutely right, I'm the most uncool person I know. But that said, I think it's lovely that all these cool people wanted to be involved in a project, which is fantastic.
Really fantastic. Right. I could chat all the time, so I'm going to shut up here. Who has got a question you'd like to ask? And I will get one of these two fit young people to come. Right, one right at the front here. Hello, just right here.
Hello.
Hi.
So first of all, I remember picking up your book 18 years ago, and I was younger than 10.
Really? Oh my God.
And it was in 2001. It was like a Christmas gift for me, and that's when 9/11 had happened, and I'd faced a lot of racism in school.
Right.
And I just wanted to say thank you firstly, because you gave me, and my friends, a language to talk about racism in school.
Okay.
So you've really inspired me with your books. But my question is, did you ever think that your books would have such an impact on young children from Black and Asian ethnic minority backgrounds, even to today?
The honest answer is no, I didn't. I mean, it was one of those books, I wrote it and I thought, it's one of those books I had to write, and I thought, I'm going to get such a kick-in for this. I thought it's either going to disappear without trace, or I'm going to get a kick-in for it because of the themes in it and so forth, and the idea of white people being the underclass, the noughts, and black people, or the crosses, being sort of the ruling class. But from my own point of view, I wanted to discuss the idea of bigotry and prejudice from whichever direction it's coming is wrong. And if we have it in a society, then that society, I think, is doomed to failure. If we treat one part of society as less than another part, there's a fundamental problem. And so I wanted to explore that, but I thought this is going to upset some adults, which it did. There's a number of adults saying, is this quite the right thing for our teens to be reading? I had other comments only from adults, never from teens, but from one adult saying, that's not the way Britain is, that this, and I thought that's why it's called fiction, fiction. So, sometimes adults I find hard work, I must admit. It's funny, never young adults and children, just adults. But for me, it was about kind of presenting those ideas and, as you said, kind of create a space and a language to discuss these things and a safe space to discuss these things. Because when you're discussing Noughts and Crosses, you're really discussing prejudice and bigotry and treating one section of society as less than another section of society. And what's interesting to me is I've had letters from kind of around the world about it, where, like, I've had so many letters from Ireland where people have said, oh, you're talking about Protestants and Catholics, aren't you? Or I've had letters from Israel where they said, you're talking about Israelis and Palestinians, aren't you? And I love that because people are taking what they need from it. Because in Noughts and Crosses, I only mention colour once, and otherwise they're Noughts and Crosses or daggers and blankers, which is it's a conceit that works in the book if you don't know the premise, because it's only when you're into it that you realise that Calum is a nought and Sephi is a cross. I mean, obviously, as soon as you watch your TV series, you see it. But it was interesting when it first came out, because even my mum sort of phoned me, and she had a proof copy, and she phoned me up, and she said, is Calum a nought or a cross? And I said, well, he's a nought. It says he's a nought. It said, is he white or black? And I said, he's white, Mum. She said, now I'm going to have to start the whole book again. I said, I thought he was black. And and it's sort of like, no, half, and put the phone down. and it's like when I wrote Knife Edge, and I kind of left Knife Edge on a bit of a cliffhanger, and my sister phoned me, and it was like, she phoned me up, and she goes, where the hell is the rest? And I said, I'm writing it now. She said, oh, for God's sake, put the phone down. so my family are very honest in their reactions, but I thought...
But in a good way.
In a good way. So, so for me, it was about creating... That's what I love about books. And it does give you a safe space to talk about things that are perhaps... are kind of painful or can be troublesome if you kind of just, or you search for the language when you're just talking about it in bald terms. But if you're talking around a book, it kind of gives you a sort of safer space to do that. And I absolutely feel that we need to talk more about these issues, because if we don't, other voices fill that gap and fill that void and give out misinformation. I think we're living in times where we have voices that are playing the fear and division card, to separate us, and because we're weaker when we're kind of fighting each other, as opposed to turning our attention to the ones we should be kind of, agitating against. So that was part of my reason for doing that. So I do hope it. Oh, what was that? Oh. Okay. Anyway, I do hope that it created a space to have those discussions.
Great question. Who's next? We've got somebody down here. Thank you.
Given how often you've revisited the world of Noughts and Crosses, has it ever occurred to you to write prequels in that world based on, say, Jasmine as a teenager, or Jed and Lynette's story, for instance?
It's interesting you say that, because at one point I was thinking about, should I do Jed and Lynette's story? But to be honest, I started Noughts and Crosses in 1999, and it came out 2001. And we're now into 2019, and I kind of feel, I've spent long enough in this world. And I at the moment, I'm working on one more book in the Noughts and Crosses series called Endgame, and I think that will be it. But I have said that before, so, as Lindsay knows. So I kind of feel, I think that's kind of enough. But, that's why when they were doing the TV series, I thought, no, I don't want to write the scripts, because I think it would be lovely for other people to have a fresh eye on it and bring new stuff into it. So the TV series is kind of the book plus, which I love. And the writers have come up with some stuff that I couldn't have, because I'm like this with the series, so I kind of see it this way. But they've really kind of broadened it out, and I love that. So would I do more? At the moment, I'm saying no. I think I'm going to do Endgame, and that's my lot.
As a fan, though, it's actually quite nice to sort of like, I couldn't imagine it going on indefinitely and not getting a proper resolution. That's somebody having read the first book at 14 and still reading them at 31.
Right. Well, you know, but that's the thing. I think that's why it's called Endgame. It's kind of a note to myself that it's the end. You know,
Yes.
finish, just finish, Laurie. Yeah, so it's kind of a note to myself that that will be the last one, and I'm going to tie everything up, and that's the lot. And you know, and with Crossfire. Originally, I thought I could get everything in the one story, but it was one of those things where I thought, okay, I need to kind of explore some things and and sort of continue it and yeah, exactly. Well, that's what it is. That's how I see it, because it's Noughts and Crosses, Knife Edge, and Checkmate as the first trilogy, and the second trilogy is Double Cross, Crossfire, and then Endgame. So Crossfire is kind of the middle of the second trilogy. My husband teases me about it's the longest trilogy in the universe because I'm on the 5th book, plus sort of World Book Day books and things. But that's how I see it. Yeah.
Next question. Somebody at the back. There's a pink jacket, a very bright pink jacket. Carry on. Up. Oh, yes, you're there. You're there. Sorry, can't see you.
When you write about Jude, when you wrote about Jude, did it make you sad because it reminded you of how Calum died because he's so...
Spoilers! Spoiler alert. Keep back, sorry, keep going.
Yeah.
Did it remind me of sort of Calum's fate, what happened to Jude? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because he's always thinking about revenge against Effie and
Well, you know, the thing about Jude is Jude is an example of someone who could have done so much more with his life if he'd been given a chance, and he's turned inward, and he's become full of anger and bitterness and hatred, and he kind of sprang a bit from. My mum told me once that because my mum was born in Barbados and sort of came over here when she was 18, I think it was, but she was saying that in her family after 14 you had to pay to stay on at school. And in her family, they paid for the boys, but not the girls. And the girls then had to be apprenticed out and whatever. And my mum loved school. But at 14, she was told, that's it, no more school for you. And she's always regretted it. And so Jude went through a similar thing where he got educated so far and then was told no further. And he became really angry and bitter about it. And so his thing is, he hates all crosses because he never reached his potential. And so what I try to do with Jude is I try to make him a three-dimensional character. He does some really horrendous, heinous stuff, but I try to, in the books, to explain what drove him to reach that point. And I mean, especially in Knife Edge, he does something in particular that I was writing it and a chill went down my spine as I was writing it, and I thought, oh my God, am I really going to leave that in? And then I thought, I can't take it out. This is true, and so, you know, it's kind of real for this character, so I left it in. So in a way, part of me feels sorry for the man he could have been and for the wasted potential, but he's not a nice man. He's a bit of a git, isn't he? So, but he is. But I had great fun writing him, and someone once said to me that all the characters an author creates are kind of a sort of facet of themselves, and I thought, oh God, I hope not, because Jude is a nasty piece of work. But I had a lot of fun writing him. Goodness.
It's easier to write the baddies than the. I mean, do you like writing?
I do like writing baddies. I must admit, and I do. I suppose it's like Crossfire, where Toby in Double Cross is kind of on one path, and then in Crossfire he goes another way, and he becomes a sort of politician who's so ruthlessly ambitious. He wants to rise to the top, and his thing is going to be the first Prime Minister, and never mind all the people he's had to step on and tread into the dirt to get there. So it was kind of interesting to kind of do that to him, because then it means that it's sort of in Endgame, it's kind of how does he redeem himself? And I wanted to explore that whole thing of the ambition, and I called Crossfire my book of ambition. With each of the Noughts and Crosses books, they kind of have a theme. So Noughts and Crosses is my book of love, and Knife Edge is my book of hate, and Checkmate is my book of hope, and Double Cross is my book of revenge, and this one is my book of ambition. So, and then the Endgame is my book of redemption, and so I kind of see it as kind of that kind of progression with the characters. And I loved the idea of kind of having 3 generations worth of stories told in the books, and that's why I think it's a good place to finish.
Well, we'll watch that space.
Indeed.
Actually, we were talking earlier about not having any spoilers because not all of you, well, certainly not all of you have read the last one. But I wonder if now might be a good time for you to, you were offering to read a little bit from the
From
book.
Crossfire.
Yeah, just to give you a taster of that.
Right. So this is a bit between Libby and Troy, who are the third generation. And Troy is Callie's half-brother, and Libby is Toby's daughter. And so this is, and it's sort of like alternate chapters in this section. So this is Libby's chapter. And what's happening in this is Libby and Troy are the last two who are, their school, Heathcroft High, is running a kind of election for a head student, for head boy or girl. And they've been told that they have to get on stage in front of the whole school, the whole upper school, and they're going to be asked some questions that have been put to them by the students, and they have to answer them. And so this is Libby's chapter, where Troy's just said something about her which she doesn't like, but this is sort of Libby's chapter. How dare you, Troy Ealing? What right do you have to say that? I'm not running for head girl just to get back at all those who might have pissed me off in the past. I'm not that petty. How dare you? Our next question is, Mrs. Paxton frowns slightly as she reads on without speaking. Okay, our next question is, name 2 good things and 1 bad thing about your opponent. Troy, would you like to go first? This should be good. Eyes narrowed, I wait to hear just what he's going to say. Troy's chapter. Crap. 2 good things about Libby. That's a tall order, like Mount Everest tall. I hear Libby is loyal to her friends and that she's good at history. The bad thing would be her ambition to become head girl for all the wrong reasons. Not for your benefit, but for her own. Libby has about as much political insight as a stale cheese sandwich, and she couldn't care less about any student issues. She sees being head girl as a stepping stone, nothing more. Okay, not my best effort, but all I could think of on the spur of the moment. Libby's expression hardens like quick drying cement. She's going to let me have it, both barrels. It's hard to come up with 1 good thing to say about Troy Ealing, never mind 2, says Libby. But I can think of a bad thing. Back in the day, Troy's mum got knocked up by a Noughts extremist called Calum McGregor, who was a terrorist. Is that really the sort of person we want as head student representing our school? The shocked gasp that ripples through the hall is nothing compared to the crippling gut punch I feel at Libby's words. Gut punch? Hell, it's more like being kicked in the nuts by a horse, then run over by a tank. My mouth falls open as I stare at Libby, unable to believe she went there. She actually went there. She's the one person I told in confidence when we used to be friends. Even when our friendship died, I still believed she'd keep my secret, just like I'd kept hers. Quid pro quo. I glance around the assembly hall. The volume of the murmurs is steadily rising. I raise my mic. My mum's past has nothing to do with me. That's her business, not mine. My mum was married to Nathan Ealing, and he's my dad. So at least I know who my dad is. Can you say the same, Libby? From what I hear, your dad could be any one of 20 different guys. More gasps from around the hall. Right, that is quite enough of that from both of you, Mrs. Paxton intervenes, her brown eyes flashing. This is a serious debate about your proposed student policies and what each of you can bring to the role. It is not a race to the bottom where each of you shows just how low you can go. I won't have it. Not in this school, ever. Sorry, Mrs. Paxton, mumbles Libby. I was the one who should have received that apology, not the head. Mrs. Paxton turns to me, waiting to hear similar fall from my mouth. My apologies, Mrs. Paxton, I say clearly. You're right, I shouldn't have descended to Liberty's level. I look at my opponent with scorn. When she went low, I should have gone high because both my parents taught me better. And I apologise to all of you in the audience. Just because most real politicians behave like Libby doesn't mean that any of us have to follow their example. I mean, I certainly don't. I'm glad to hear it, says Mrs. Paxton, still vexed. She dips into the box again. I expect all of us to continue this debate in a civilised manner. The next question is, I look across the hall as Mrs. Paxton asks the next question. Every student is now facing forward in rapt attention. The only thing missing is the popcorn. I turn to Libby. She's looking at me with total loathing. I return her look with interest. If we weren't standing in front of hundreds of witnesses, I'd show her exactly what I think about her swipe at my mum. If it's the last thing I do, I'll make her pay for that. Libby's chapter, total bastard. Troy's chapter, toxic bitch. Excuse the language, but...
Oh, it is powerful stuff. Now, there's a line in there which, Michelle Obama used that line,
Yeah.
when we go low, we go high,
Yeah.
when we go low, we go high.
That's an homage to Michelle Obama.
Yeah, well,
homage.
who better, who better? I mean, a lot of, there's a lot in the new book which is uncannily reflecting what's going on in the world today. To what extent do you shut yourself off from it, or are you open to...
Well, you can't shut yourself off from it. It's on the news and it's going on, and it's kind of going on in my own life. I mean, since Brexit, I've been told to go back to where I came from and so forth, and all that racist rhetoric has started up again. And as I said in a number of interviews, I've heard more racist rhetoric directed at myself in the last 3 years than I have in the last 30, which just kind of makes me incredibly sad. But I think... So, it's something you can't cut yourself off from. But that said, the whole thing about politicians and ambitious politicians rising to the top, whatever they need, and doing whatever they need to do to get there. I finished the book last year, and so, so people are saying, oh, you're talking about this politician or that, and I'm not, because, it was finished a while ago. But it's kind of interesting to me that it has a lot of parallels to what's going on in the real world. And it's sort of like with Checkmate, with when I did that, and it was Callie Rose being groomed, when she's 16, being groomed by her uncle to be a suicide bomber. And it was and then we had the book launch on 7/7 when all the bombs were going off in London. And I got kind of vilified in the press for people saying I was cashing in and so forth, which is a load of nonsense. I mean, anyone who knows the book, how things work, Checkmate is like an 90,000 word book. And I'd finished it 8 months beforehand, but it was just coincidence that she's being groomed to be a suicide bomber, and the launch of the book was 7/7.
Yeah. Next question, please. There's a gentleman here in a blue jumper.
And then we got one up there, I think. So.
Up there. Great.
You talked at the start about...
Sorry, who's talking?
Hi, I'm George.
Could you wave your hand?
Hi.
Oh, all right, okay, right.
You talked at the start about using libraries a lot when you were young.
Yeah.
And libraries are in threat all over the country. Do you want to just say something about that as to why it's happening? Do you think it's just a money-saving exercise, or is it a way of disenfranchising a whole load of folks who don't have access to literature and books?
I think it's both. And I think, and at the risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, I think libraries are a great equalizer. And politicians spout on about social mobility and aspirations and trying to raise everybody up, blah, 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 blah. But one of the best ways of doing that is to make sure everyone has access to a library. And I wouldn't be sitting here now if it wasn't for my local library, because I couldn't afford books. And so closing them down means if you can afford books and you're in that lucky position, you can buy books and you can afford them, then all power to you. But what about everybody else who can't? And it's not just about that. It's about them being community hubs. It's about being safe spaces. When I was a teenager, most evenings after school, I would go to my library so I could get on with my homework and do so in peace. And so all of that is being lost with libraries being closed. And part of me thinks, is this a way of just making sure that people don't have a voice? Because what reading does and what libraries do is when you're reading, you're absorbing ideas and concepts and so forth, and it's encouraging you to talk about those and articulate those ideas, etc. And with removing those libraries, are we then making sure that people might feel a way but they can't articulate it, that they can't argue against what's going on? And I understand that local authorities are having their budget slashed. So they have, you know, and people say, well, if it's a case of a home for the elderly or a library, then, you know, which one should it be? But my argument is it shouldn't be either. And I think, and it really gets to me when I see it's not just public libraries, but some schools are closing their libraries as well. And so if you can't afford books, where do you get them from? So I think it's incredibly important. And part of me wonders now, because it's been going on for so long, part of me wonders if this is a sort of deliberate ploy to ensure that working class people, etc., do not have a voice and do not have access to kind of that knowledge and learning and so forth that libraries provide. And therefore, if you don't have a voice, then you can't speak out in a way where you can be heard. And so I kind of feel we have to kind of just challenge this and fight this. And every library closure we kind of have to fight, because what it's doing is depriving people of that opportunity to have a voice and to have their voices heard. And you know, and all this thing about, they talk about social mobility and blah blah blah. And I just think, well, if you meant it, then libraries wouldn't be closing at the rate they are. So it does make me really cross. I shall climb down off my high horse now, but it does make me incredibly cross, because I know what libraries did to me and did for me. And I know for a fact I would not be sitting here, and I wouldn't have written any books if it hadn't been for my local libraries. And it makes me cross that our children growing up are not going to have the same opportunities that I had. And I think that's wrong. We should be making things easier for our children and for our grandchildren, and not making them harder. And I look at my daughter and I think, what are we doing to this planet with plastic and so forth? You are going to retire later than I might do. I mean, I hope I might until I kind of blow away. But I kind of hope that, you know, but with my daughter, they're talking about, you know, raising the retirement age. She is going to find it harder to kind of buy her own place. I was able to buy my own flat when I was 21. And when I bought my first flat, because I've been working since I was 18, I bought my first flat, I think it was for £32,000. It was a 2-bedroom flat. And I looked up on Zoopla to find out how much it is now. It's £350,000. And I thought, you know, who can afford that? If you're a teacher or a nurse or whatever, how on earth do you afford £350,000 for a 2-bedroom flat? That's ridiculous. Sorry, but I'm going off. But anyway, yeah, so yes, for going back to libraries, I do think what's happening, I do wonder if there's some social policy work at work here, because I just think that this cannot be going on for so long, and you know, and it just happens to be happenstance. It's an accident. So I just wonder, you know, it just makes me wonder. Let's put it that way.
Good question. Up here, this.
I just wanted to ask if, when you wrote Noughts Crosses, did you know you were going to do any sequels, or did you have to be encouraged by, like, family?
No, because originally I knew I wanted to do the story of Calum and Seffi and their daughter Callie Rose, and would you believe I thought I'd fit it all in one book? And then I got to page like 400 and something, and Callie Rose had only just been born, and I thought, okay, it's going to be 2 books. And I wrote Knife Edge, and at the end of and 300 and whatever pages into Knife Edge, Callie Rose was a year old, and I thought, okay, it's going to be 3 books. And so I wrote Checkmate, and I thought, okay, that's it, it's finished. And then one of the minor characters in Checkmate, Toby Durbridge, started whispering in my ear, and it was around the time we were having the sort of spate of knife crimes in this country, and he started whispering in my ear about I was joining a gang and to make some money, but he was going to join it, make some money, and then leave. But these things are always easier to join than they are to leave. They don't let you go. And I couldn't write anything else until I told his story. So that's how Double Cross was born. And then I thought, okay, Double Cross is it. It's finished. And then we had like Brexit and Trump, and then I thought, and then Toby started whispering in my ear again, and that's how Crossfire was born. So, you know, so I thought, so they're still whispering in my ear, but with Endgame, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to say, you know what, that's it. I'm not listening anymore. But I keep, as you know, I keep saying that, and then another one happens. But with, as I said, I think Endgame is it. But it was originally supposed to be one book. So there you go. But at least my thing is, I only write them when I really know I can't write anything else. When I have a story and I definitely need to kind of let it out, it's not about, oh, let's see if I can write another Noughts Crosses from, you know, because it's definitely about, okay, I'm being pulled into doing it, kicking and screaming. So, next question. There's one at the front here and there's another one at the back
Should we
there.
take one at the front here? Oh. Just in the, oh, right. And then we'll come to you after that one. Yes.
I think when I was reading about Jude, I think quite often I had to catch myself because I was thinking, you're empathising with a terrorist right now. And I just think, is that something you think we have to do? Do you think we should empathise with terrorists, or do you think we should alienate it as a whole to try and stop it from happening?
That's a really interesting question, because what I wanted with Jude in particular, and with Calum, because he becomes a terrorist as well, is I wanted you to understand what made them feel that that was the only course open to them. But I absolutely didn't want you to sympathise with what they were doing, because what they were doing is kind of really heinous. But I wanted you to understand what, and kind of empathise with what led them to that, but not sympathise with what they were doing. And especially because when I used to be a computer programmer, and I used to work in a city, and it was around the time the IRA had their mainland bombing campaign. And it was one of these things where you kind of, you got on with your life, but it was one of those things where you thought, well, is today the day that, you know, I catch a bomb or whatever? So it's certainly not something I would say, I want you to sympathise with terrorists, but just kind of understand what maybe leads people to think this is their only course of action, particularly political terrorists. So yeah, that's the reason. But for me, that was the interesting thing, kind of going into Jude and Calum's, and they come at it from different angles, because Calum he wants to try and change the system from the inside by going to Heathcroft and changing things from the inside, but it doesn't work, because every step of the way he's been kind of knocked down, and so he feels that, and then when that door is closed to him, he feels like the only way he can affect change is to join a terrorist cell. And so I kind of wanted to explore that, but I certainly don't want anyone feeling like, you know, I've got sympathy for him, but I do hope that you understand why they did it. So, good question though. And then we were going to the...
Have you got a... Oh, who's the next one? Who's got the microphone?
Oh, there's one.
There was one at the front here. I was going to pass it on to the girl. Have you got it? Yes.
When you were writing about Calum and Seffi's families, could you relate like at all to their situation, where they lived at all?
Well, with Calum I could, because a lot of the stuff that happens to Calum actually happened to me. So I cheated on him. When people say to me, are you in any of your books? Before Noughts and Crosses, I'd say no, all my characters are made up. But with Calum, a lot of the stuff, you know, like things like the first time he travels first class on a train, and then he gets accused by the ticket inspector of stealing the ticket. And that happened to me when I was 17. And I was on the train, and I'd saved that for first class. I thought, oh, I'm in first class. And the ticket inspector came on and insisted I must have stolen the ticket. And I was absolutely mortified, because he wanted to chuck me off the train. And I was saying, no, I bought it. And I to this day, I kind of remember how embarrassed I felt. And that's in Noughts and Crosses. That happens to Calum. And another one was when I said to my history teacher, how come you never talk about black scientists and achievers and inventors? And she said, because there aren't any. And I thought, well, there must be some. It's just you've never taught us any, or you don't know about any. And I had to educate myself when I was in my 20s. And so I have a chapter in Noughts and Crosses where the teacher is saying, oh, these are all the cross inventors and achievers, and sort of like people like Charles Drew, who did Dr. Charles Drew, who did open heart surgery, the first person to do open heart surgery, etc. And all of those people are real people. They are all kind of black people, people of colour, who've done things. And that's why Calum says, well, how come you never talk about naught scientists and achievers? And his teacher says, because there aren't any. And that is kind of, again, from the conversation I had with my history teacher. So a lot of those things, when I was writing it, I could relate more to Calum's life, because that was closer to my own than Seffi's, because she's kind of rich and the daughter of the Home Secretary and so on. But it was kind of fun. It was really interesting and fun to write both. But it meant that writing Calum was a very painful experience, because of all the stuff I put in there, that was actually true stuff that happened to me. So it made it a very painful book to write, but it was also really satisfying to write and really cathartic, because I kind of let go of stuff that happened to me. Because before I thought I'd let go of stuff, but I hadn't. I just buried it. And with Noughts and Crosses, I could kind of finally write it down and let it go. So I find writing really, it's like a psychiatrist's couch, because things that, it's my way of dealing with things. Like, for example, my parents split up when I was 13, and it was a really bitter split, and that's when I started keeping a diary. And I kind of wrote all my thoughts and feelings and all my anger I got poured into these diaries over the course of 4 years. And and what I didn't realize at the time was it got me into the habit of writing every day, which is something you need to do as a writer. But it also meant that I wasn't afraid to write down real thoughts and feelings, even when they were negative. And I would never show anyone my diaries, but it meant that I was not afraid of writing real feelings and real emotions, even when they were negative, and I didn't shy away from that. So, for all the writers in the room, I'd recommend keeping a diary for a while. It's a really good way of getting into that writing habit and writing truthfully. So, but if you don't want anyone to see it, just make sure you hide it well.
Yes.
So. Any more questions?
Where's the microphone? Have we got a microphone?
Oh, there's one over there. Sorry,
yes, yes, go on, give it to somebody. Yes. Right. You see a boy in a green t-shirt, you see?
Yeah.
Yes.
Why did you name all of the books the way you named them, and what did they mean to you?
Good question. Well, Noughts and Crosses, I'm assuming you're talking about the Noughts and Crosses series. Noughts and Crosses, at first I was going to call it Snakes and Ladders, up, down the snake, up the ladder kind of thing. And then I thought, no, that's not working for me. And then I thought Noughts and Crosses because nought sounds like nothing, zero, and the crosses because they kind of, some of them feel they're closer to God in every way. And it's kind of summed up those two groups. And that also, because Noughts and Crosses is a game that no one plays past childhood because no one ever wins. So what's the point? So it kind of felt like a metaphor for racism to me. And, at the risk of sounding a bit arty-farty literati, but that's the reason, because I thought, why on earth does nobody plays Noughts and Crosses. You can't win it, so what's the point? So it just seemed to sum up beautifully what I was trying to say with the book. And I also made up the derogatory names for Noughts and Crosses, like daggers and blankers, because I wanted to have my own sort of slang terms. And so it's set in alternate Britain, and I wanted it to kind of have an alternate feel but be very recognisable. So that's how Noughts and Crosses was born. And then with Knife Edge, I tried to come up with another game kind of idea, but struggled. And then I thought, but these kind of things are on a knife edge in that one. So I thought, okay, we'll have Knife Edge. And then Checkmate, I thought, because it's finished, so the king goes down, and it's checkmate. And then Double Cross was kind of, in a way, because when Callie Rose gets shot, and it's kind of Toby's fault, and he goes after the ones who have kind of done it, and he sort of sets himself up as working for these people, but he fully intends to double cross them to kind of get revenge on them for what they did to Callie Rose. But in a way, he's also double crossing himself because he kind of loses his soul slightly in his thirst for revenge. So that's how Double Cross is born. And Crossfire was kind of because Troy and Libby get kind of caught in a crossfire of what's going on with Callie and Toby, and I really regret to this day calling Troy and Toby because it's two T's and it's sort of like Troy, Toby, and I've got to think about that, so I should have called him something that started with another letter, but there you go. So yeah, but that's how the names came about.
I think we've got time for one more.
Gosh, that's gone fast.
I know. Is a microphone nearby? I'm sorry, I can't quite see. Yes. Now, who would you like to give the microphone to? You're the one with the power.
That over there, because
might come one
yeah,
more.
okay.
Yes, we'll go for you, and then finally over there. Right.
Did you always know you wanted to be a writer, or did you originally think of other things?
Originally, from the time I was 7, 8, I wanted to be an English teacher because I wanted to have just teach children and to have a love of reading and a love of stories. And in my head, I was going to be an English teacher. That was going to happen. And then when I was 17, and I was doing my A-levels, and a careers teacher who had to do my, UCA forms, they're called UCAS now, I think, but they were UCA in my day. And she said to me, Laurie, what do you want to do? And I said, I had it all worked out, and I said, I want to go to Goldsmiths College, and I want to do an English and drama degree, and then I want to do my teacher training, and I want to be an English teacher. And she looked at me and she said, well, black people don't become teachers. She said, why don't you be a secretary instead? And I remember looking at her thinking, what? And then she saw my face and she said, and besides, I don't think you're going to get your English A-level. And I've never failed an English exam in my life, thank you very much. So then she said, and then she said, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you a reference for that. She said, I will give you a reference I'll give you a reference to go to Polytechnic and do business studies, but I'm not giving you a reference to go to university. Black people don't do that. And so I ended up going to Polytechnic and doing a business studies degree, which was I knew it was a mistake before I got there, and it was a complete and utter waste of my time because I hated it. And, you know, and economics and accounting, oh my God, kill me now. I mean, not to disrespect anyone who's into that world, but I hated it so much. But halfway through the first term, I was rushed to hospital and had to have my appendix out, so I gave up my place. And then I applied to Goldsmiths College and I got in. And so to do my English and drama degree. Thank you, but you're a bit premature because I decided I was going to work for a year, make some money, and then do my degree. And then I started working at a software house, and it's the first time I touched a computer, and I got hooked. So I gave up my place at Goldsmiths and stayed in computing for 9 years. So there you go. So I kind of look back and I think, but you know what? That careers teacher did me a favor because she taught me that when people are standing in your face saying, no, that's not for you or you can't do it, don't waste your time arguing with them. Don't, for goodness sake, let them stop you. Just find a way to go around them. So when I was getting all my rejection letters when I first started writing, I mean, it was sort of 8 or 9 books and 82 rejection letters before a publisher said yes. And when I was getting all those rejection letters, I thought, well, okay, if they don't like this one, they'll like the next one. And if this editor doesn't like it, I'll find another editor. Maybe they'll like it. So she did me a favor. She taught me that not to stop, but find a way to make it work. So thank you, Mrs. Twist.
Sort of. I think we've got time for one more very quick question. Yes.
What inspired you, like which book inspired you to write Noughts and Crosses?
I don't think it was any book that particularly inspired me. It was kind of real life events that inspired me to write Noughts and Crosses, stuff that had happened in my own childhood. The Stephen Lawrence case, that inspired me to write it. So I don't think, but you know what? Every good book or every book I'd read that I really enjoyed up until that moment, it has inspired me to write. So I'd say, you know, just all books that I've loved inspired me to write, and all books that I've read and thought were rubbish have kind of inspired me because they made me think, oh, I could write better than that. so and I thought, well, you know, let me see if I can write better than that, because I started off writing poems and then short stories. And my first few kind of published books were Early Readers and the picture book. And then it was my first novel was a book called Hacker, and that was again me sitting down thinking, let me see if I can write a novel. And so you know, so as I said, every book I've read and I've loved has inspired me to write. Can I just ask, how many people in here are writers or want to be writers or whatever? Oh, quite a few. Okay. Well, excellent. Well, my advice to you is don't give up. And I'll finish with this last anecdote. It's, when I was getting all my rejection letters, and this is around about the 70th rejection letter, and Alice Walker came to Britain, and she was doing a book signing at the Silver Moon Bookshop in Charing Cross Road. And I queued up for like 2 hours because I thought I wanted to sign my book. And when I got to the front of the queue, I said to her, oh, could you write Don't Give Up, please? And she said, I can't write that. What does that mean? And I said, well, I want to be a writer, but I keep getting rejection letters. So she looked at me, she said, don't you dare give up. And she wrote in my book, Don't Give Up, Alice Walker. So I thought, well, I can't give up now. Alice Walker said so, you know. So that was wonderful. And I've still got the book at home to this day. So for my advice to all you writers and anyone who kind of wants to do creative stuff or whatever, do not give up. I mean, that said, if you want to be a singer and you can't carry a tune in a bucket, it's not going to happen. But that said, there's nothing to stop you from kind of writing songs or producing them or whatever. So find a way to make it work, but don't give up.
I'm really sorry we're at the end, but I'm going to take Malorie untrampled round to the signing tent. And I know if you've got questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, I'm sure she'll answer them there, and she will certainly sign copies of the book. we have got to rush out here. Can I just say, Malorie Blackman, you are a star. Thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Right, should I